Welcome to week number 10 of BurnerCast. Hi again, everybody. I'm your host, Joey Strutz. Only have one other host with us tonight. We got my buddy Brad Hosmer joining us live in the studio. McKenna couldn't make it this week, but she will be back for our next episode. How you doing tonight, Brad?
Pretty solid. How about yourself, Joey?
Doing good. Finally getting back flying, getting in the swing of things. Almost done with exams here at college, so I am very, very well right now.
Very good.
We got a really fun episode for you guys tonight. She has multiple world records flying and has most recently become a repairman in ballooning. Please welcome Kim Magee to the show. Hey, welcome in, Kim.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on. It's an honor to have you on. So the first thing we're going to talk about tonight, we go into this with kind of all of our guests, is kind of how did you get your start in ballooning? You know, we just go into that.
Yeah, unfortunately, my story's kind of boring compared to most people's. I'm a second generation pilot, so my parents got their first hot air balloon the year I was born, so I've always known it. I went to my first balloon function at 2 weeks old. It was a Christmas party, so not an actual balloon event, but I got introduced to it early on. But I actually didn't get into flying. I didn't want to be a pilot until I went away to college. And after I went to college and I was without ballooning for that, first year of college, I came back for the summer and decided I really wanted to do it. And I missed ballooning and had my license within a couple months then after that. So I wasn't the typical second generation, got it at 16. I actually didn't get my license until I was 19.
So the main meat potatoes of this episode is, unless you've been living under a rock, Kim, over the last couple of years, had some pretty amazing record flights. So we want to talk about those record flights today on BurnerCast, if that's all right with you.
Yeah.
So first off with the record flights, how did the ideas come about? Where did you get these ideas from and how did that come about?
Yeah, it actually happened. I was just at an event once and talked to a lady who had done some national records in a small balloon, and made the offhand comment, well, you're a small female pilot. You could probably do these records, much easier than the guys could. And, the more I got to thinking about it, my family owned a hopper, a 35,000 cubic foot hopper. And I was like, well, we have the equipment. I'm a small pilot, I should use that to my advantage. And so that's where I started. And it kind of morphed from there because our family balloon wasn't good enough to get the record done. So that kind of led us into finding a better system in that category. And in doing that, we found an extra balloon kind of with it. So that's how I did the multiple flights.
So you kind of got into a little bit, but how did you come across getting those balloons to record flights, or where were they at the time? How did you get them in your hands?
Yeah, so we were in search of an AX5 because that's the original size my family had for a hopper balloon. And the AX5 category goes up to 42,000 cubic feet. So we were looking for something on the higher end of the category, since what we had originally had was on the lower end of the size category, which puts me at a big disadvantage for getting the records for that category. Bigger balloon, more weight you can hold, more fuel I can take up. And I was going for distance and altitude, so I wanted to be able to, everybody wants more fuel on flights, really. So it doesn't matter what flight you're on. But so we kind of put some feelers out, and we got word that a guy in Louisville had these balloons made. He had planned on doing flights, and he also had an AX2 as well built. So he had an AX5 that he had built for these. He also shipped around as well to international events. That was his personal balloon. He had a collapsible basket with it, and then a little tiny AX2. And that, he was a smaller stature guy, and he thought he would do records with those. And so when we got those, we kind of jumped at the chance to do all the records. But it's an interesting story of going down to Louisville. I had just started training for my fixed wings license, and I had to go down and look at these balloons. And so I flew down. I met my dad down there, who drove down to meet him. And saw the balloons. They were great. He had all sorts of other stuff, that my dad was interested in as well, other equipment that he was trying to sell. And I get back to the airport, and my little Piper Warrior that I flew down there from Iowa as a student pilot, and it's about a 4-hour flight for me. And I get back in, and I have to make it back before dark because I'm a student. I wasn't signed off to solo at night yet. And so this was supposed to be a super quick trip. And I get back in the plane and it won't start. It's not starting. It's not starting. And I am so nervous. It's just like I'm way too far from my home airport. I don't know what's going on. It's a Saturday. The mechanic's not on duty. I'm trying to go into the FBO, figure out what's going on and get anybody to help me. And thankfully, when I walked into the FBO, there happened to be another pilot there who was the mechanic at the airport, but he was just there fixing a plane on his day off of his own personal. He was rebuilding one. So he came out and looked at it. And the first thing he goes, well, you're not flying very far, are you? I was like, only 4 hours. So by the time we got the plane started and took off, it was going to be too late for me to land back at home before dark. And so my sister only lived about a 45-minute flight away in Evansville, Indiana. And so I kind of had to divert and spend an unexpected night at my sister's house. So that was kind of fun and interesting start to the record-getting story. Yeah.
So, you talked about kind of getting the balloons and going from there. What other flight planning was involved? How much did you plan before the actual flight occurred?
Everything. So, the goal was to, knowing myself and anybody, you're nervous on the day of, you're not thinking correctly. You're not, something's going to get overlooked. So everything was planned beforehand, down to every single thing, it was even weighed. So a lot of it was calculating how much the balloon could take up, how much fuel weighed, how much the equipment weighed, how much I weighed, how much my clothes weighed. I even got out a food scale and weighed my 2 different aircraft radios so I could see which one was 2 ounces heavier than the other. And I took, the lighter one, just things you don't think about, my base layer for clothing, it's just any way I could shave weight, I did. And, as far as planning all the other stuff, it's flight planning, for a normal flight taken to the utmost extreme. I wasn't planning just for my area. I was literally looking at the whole of the US and where I could go. So I'm looking at flight planning in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, if I could get away with it. A lot in like Michigan area too. It was just, I don't think I went probably more than an hour every single day without looking at weather, terrains, airspace, anything you could think of.
So how long of a window did you have to complete the flights?
Yeah, you only get 3 months to do it. So you have to apply a certain number of days before you plan to do the flight. And then you only get a 3-month window, which kind of stinks for us because we want to do a winter flight for records because the colder it is, the more weight I can take up, the longer I can stay up. So either the higher I can go, the further I can go, or the longer you can fly. And, you can't quite you can either do December through February, or you can do January through March. And you have to make that decision, what's going to work out best. So I opted for kind of a January through March, knowing that March would put me in a little warmer weather, but usually the cold systems aren't set up very well yet in December. It's not quite that polar vortex that we're looking for. And those tend to happen end of January and February was the goal. There were stuff that I could have gone in December that I missed, and who knows, those might have been better, but it's a decision you make.
So, going more into flight planning, checklists is something that's iterated to pilots daily. I don't care what rank you are, checklists are always iterated.
Yeah.
What different checklists did you use for this flight specifically?
Everything. So I had a checklist. My chase crew had a checklist. I had to have an official photographer. They had a checklist. My official observer also had a checklist of things. And, I would put the littlest things on there. It's not just instruments, it's secure instrument to, for my AX2 record flight, they were secured to my legs. So, I don't have uprights to put them on. So it's like secure instrument to leg, it's secure, not only my flight tech, but my GPS. And, I had a backup GPS, and it's, put hand warmers in pockets, make sure you have X number, things like that. For these kind of flights, it's you can't really depend on your muscle memory. And, every time you go out and fly, we generally do the same thing. I try to lay out my balloon similar, walk around it, do the pre-flight inspection the same every time for a normal flight. But for a flight like this, it's special. It's not something we do every day. So those pre-flight checks are not ingrained in the memory. So everything was written down, and I wanted to make sure not only I had everything covered, but my crew also had everything covered that they would need to do.
Now, this is the one and only time you've actually flown these balloons. So again, back to the whole checklist thing, that's a whole new system for you. So when you're getting to prep and, kind of getting this balloon ready to go, are you ever thinking in the back of your head, like, I don't know how this balloon's going to respond. I don't know anything this balloon's going to do. Like, what was those kind of thoughts when you're going through this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so everything was, all the calculations I did were, I tried to calculate worst case scenario. So taking, everything I rounded up on weights, and then, degrees, I would try to calculate, I thought it was going to be hotter than maybe what the forecast was. And, just things like you just plan for the worst, really, and hope for the best. You never know what's going to happen. And that's, checklists do come in handy there, not having, done these flights before. The only time I had seen either balloon inflated was for the flights. We took them out and checked them, and, but, I got in, and that was the first time I had been in it. So we had checklists also for making sure we packed everything correctly, and, things like that, pre-travel checklist, as well. And yeah, it's an interesting feeling, going in to fly these, extreme flights in a system you're not familiar with. It didn't dawn on me until I was 10,000 feet in the air that this was only the second time I had ever flown a hopper. And I hadn't flown a hopper in 5 years. So not only was it, it's not an aircraft I'm familiar with flying, but it was also, way out of practice for doing something. Luckily a balloon is a balloon. Conditions make them react different. The cold, it reacts really different, and hoppers are very touchy with how small they are. But it's kind of one of those things. I'm glad I didn't realize that before I took off. It probably would have made me a lot more nervous than I was. Not to say I wasn't nervous, but that probably would have made it worse.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the see-through balloon that you used, that balloon had only been flown like once or two times before, and there's only probably maybe that many more flights left on it, right? It's like the special fabric. It might never be flown again. Right.
Yeah. It's made out of what's called Trispy, which is in the Mylar family. So those crinkly silver-looking balloons you get at birthday parties. It's the same kind of fabric, but it's see-through, and it's crinkly, it's super thin, super lightweight, so which makes it really great for record flights, and it can withstand a lot higher temperatures. So where our normal fabric only goes up to, 300 degrees is really, you can't really push it past that without seriously damaging the fabric. This one I could fly at 400 degrees and it would be okay. So that meant I could carry more fuel, which was nice, because in doing all these calculations for how to find how much weight I could take up, I found that, if I took 30 more pounds of stuff, if I was 30 pounds heavier or, had 30 more pounds of fuel, the balloon wouldn't have taken off. So, the margin of error on an AX2 or a small balloon like that is really slim. So that's why I'm standing there in the kitchen weighing my radios and things like that.
How much fuel did you carry with you on each flight?
Yeah, for the AX2, I carried 20. I had a 20-gallon tank strapped to my back, and then actually for the AX5, I managed to fit in. I had 5 titanium tanks, so those are like 13.5 gallons each. And I mean, and both of them, we kind of talked about the worst case scenario. I took more than I used, and some of that was in my control, some of that was out of my control. Weather factors. I could have kept going on both flights and didn't. I only ended up using. I had 8 gallons left on the AX2 flight, and I hadn't even cracked into one of my tanks yet. I think I had a tank and a half left on my AX5 flight. After 6 hours in the air on that one, and the AX2 flight was 2 hours in the air. So I still had plenty of fuel for both of them. But, I made the decision to land safely, knowing I had some records, and keep pushing it.
So, the days of the flights roll around. What emotions do you have?
Nerves, lots of nerves. Yeah, I'd like to say, you're cool, calm, and collected for these flights. But, if you're not nervous for these flights, you're probably not thinking through them clearly. But it's excitement as well, and luckily there's a lot that needs to be done. So it keeps you busy and it keeps you on your toes, and just going through, the checklist helped to make sure you're doing point A, point B, point C. And I woke up for each of these flights, my alarm clock was, I think, 4 hours before launch. So I'm waking up at, I think 2:30 in the morning was my first alarm clock for them, and checking weather and calling my weather guy, poor Brad, to call him at 3 o'clock in the morning, making sure the window is still looking good and still having favorable conditions, what changed overnight, and things like that. So it's a lot of time to you're busy, but it's still a lot of time before a flight to get those nerves up.
Yeah, the funny part is we've learned so much about the records and what goes into them. We haven't even got to the flight yet. That's the part we're trying to get to. So I know we kind of did on purpose, trying to get kind of little feedback on it. So let's kind of get into the flight now. So you finally get to that day. How did you go about picking the locations? Was there kind of okay, we're going this time at this place, or was there any other options you considered, in that same day, or how did that kind of work?
Yeah, so we'd usually get about, I'd give my crew about a week heads up that this day looks good. That's all they'd get. And then we'd narrow it down to kind of a radius of places. And, usually it's North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota areas. That's just, at least when I was looking, that's where the fronts happened to set up, those pressure systems that were really good. And so then, the day before, I would have crew driving up and meeting me in Iowa, and we'd go up from Iowa and drive. We'd start driving. And so what would happen is these systems always set up behind a really nasty front. These high pressures would set up perfectly after you had some really awful blizzard conditions. So thankfully my crew was awesome, and they drove through these blizzard conditions while I kind of relaxed in the car, prepping myself for these flights on the way up. And then usually we wouldn't decide where we were going until we were in the car on the way up that night. And sometimes, we made that decision, a couple hours out, at best, which city we wanted to stop in. And then once you get to a city where you decide the weather's going to be the best, it was really just back to basic ballooning, scouting out what looks like a good launch site. Just finding a lot of it was parking lots because it was so snow-packed and cold. So those are the only things you could really get to. But finding something that's good, one of these we tried to do on a Sunday. So that's something you got to think about is church-going crowds, so even though church parking lots are usually great and wide open, sometimes you got to think out of the box, or, if a school's going on, pre-pandemic.
Yeah, there's so much stuff. Like, I was trying to think about this at work today. I was, even thinking about your episode, and I'm like, there's so much stuff I didn't even think about in these record flights. I've talked to you quite a bit, being around you for training and just hanging out at your guys' place. But like there's so much stuff I've learned even in this brief time we've talked so far about these record flights. This is awesome. So now I guess we'll get to the in-flight. So we're finally there. Finally get the balloon inflated. So like, what kind are you thinking at that point? Are you get in the air and you said you're nervous, what else is kind of going through your mind? You're still scared well, not really scared. You're just nervous over the balloons. Are you just kind of flying, flying. You're just up there. And I know I've talked to your husband about this, and he said he's kind of bored. He can't really see you. So he lost radio contact to know that much. So kind of go into the flight now, why don't you?
Yeah. So I'll do the AX2 first, since that was kind of my first experience. I had done an AX5 flight the previous winter that I guess was a failure. I didn't make it to my goal. I ended up landing 8 miles short of the women's world record for distance, which, I mean, it kind of turned out to be a blessing, because then I got to experience all of these other flights, in the meantime. So taking off for the AX2 in Fargo, North Dakota. I mean, once you take off, it's, then I start to kind of calm down, and, then it's just my mind is kind of in, I got to get this done. I know I have to do this. I have to do this. I have to do this. It's not just flying. It's, I have tasks. Then I have a set rate of climb I wanted to maintain. So, how much we harp on you when we're training, you have to go up and down X number of feet per minute, plus or minus. Well, my plus or minus I allowed for myself was like less than 5 feet. I was on it. I did not want to vary at all, because the more you vary those, even those climbs, especially the straight and levels, the more fuel you're losing. You're just wasting fuel at that point, trying to overcorrect or not overcorrect, but just trying to get back to that median. So it was a lot of looking at my instruments, and climbing out of West Fargo. There's a large airport there, so I was talking to air traffic control there, and there's also an Air Force base. So I was communicating with ATC, making sure they had me, and making sure they were, and they were thankfully communicating with the Air Force base on my behalf. So I didn't have to talk to ATCs. So that was really nice. But in doing so, I opted to only take up one radio on that flight. And I just took an aircraft radio, because I knew I would have to talk to ATC, and that was kind of non-negotiable. And so I instructed my crew that I would talk to ATC once they released me from their airspace. I would switch over to just a common traffic frequency, and I could talk to my crew on that. All those best plans. And then it's, I'm sitting up there and it's creeping up to -50. I'm freezing, I can't feel my fingers. I have these huge mitts on, trying to keep my hands warm, and trying to change the radio frequency to get over there. And I ended up accidentally turning it on to the emergency frequency. And I could not, for the life of me, get it off of that. I just could not do it. It just, any button I pressed, it was trying to transmit on the emergency frequency. And, after a minute of trying, which is a minute of me losing altitude, trying to gain back my altitude, I said, screw it. I turned my radio off. I put it in my jacket, and I said, they can find me later. So my poor crew on that flight, luckily they had me. I was, had a radio signal that they were following, and so they could see me. They knew where I was at, but they weren't talking to me at all. And so I had told them I was only going to be up in the air for about an hour. I thought I'd go straight up, straight down. My goal was an altitude flight. I really wanted to make it to 15,000 feet. Unfortunately, overnight a cloud layer had developed at about 12,000 feet, and so I was capped at that, below that. I couldn't break through it, and so I thought straight up, straight down, not a problem. Takes me, 45 minutes to get up, maybe 15, 20 minutes to get back down. And I'm sitting up there at an hour and a half and 2 hours, and my crew hasn't heard from me, and, they're still following me. So it looks like it's okay, but they have no idea what's going on. And that's kind of what I alluded to. I thought, I opted to land for safety reasons, because it was pushing -50 up at altitude. by all my calculations, I should have been at least showing on a tank after an hour. I had one tank, that was it. And so I thought it should have been, at least down to 20%. And so I'm up there and it's not showing. And in my mind, I thought the gauge had frozen. So I thought it wasn't working. I have no idea how much fuel I have left. And I'm sitting up there trying to rock this whole balloon back and forth. I'm, swinging my legs out like I'm on a roller coaster. I can't get it to move. So I thought for sure it's frozen. There's no way that I have enough fuel left. And so I start coming down, and as I get down to 5,000 feet, it finally starts showing. So I know I have a ton of fuel left, but I had already, at that point, I knew I had a couple records, way more than I thought I did. I thought I was just going to get an altitude record that day. I had jotted down on a sticky note I had taped to my glove 2 other the distance records that I might get if, I thought, I thought it was supposed to only be about 35 miles an hour up there, but ended up being 55 miles an hour. So I cruised up there for a little bit in this tiny balloon with your feet hanging off. And so I opted to land because I saw my crew rounding a corner. I saw a bunch of open fields, and it was a good flight. And even though I could have kept going, it's one of those things. Be happy with what you got.
So you're up there, whatever altitude you're at, and you're shaking around. You were at all worried you're going to lose anything out the jacket or off your legs? You're in a hopper, for crying out loud. I mean,
yeah, it was a little nerve-wracking. But it's one of those. Your mind is so focused on the task at hand. It's not. You didn't have a whole lot of capacity to think about anything else that was going on. Yeah, everything was very strapped to me. I had straps on my gloves. I had taken an oxygen tank, hoping the cloud layer might break up, and that's hooked on, sealed tight. All of my instruments are like double wrapped around me. I had strikers I had long strings on that I could, pull up at a moment's notice, which I used very frequently. So, things were not falling off of that balloon.
When didn't you have a mirror attached, so you could see the tank and everything too?
Yeah. So you sit there and your burner is just directly above your head, and then kind of in the frame that holds the burner, it's a polished piece of metal that sits here. And so you look at it and you're actually reading the tank gauge backwards. So I knew from my practice flight that, there's a lot going on, things can get confusing. So I actually ended up taping a bright red piece of tape on the empty side of the gauge so I could easily read it without having to try to think and reverse it in my mind. So I would know as soon as I was starting to look, get low on fuel.
See, the more we talk about this flight, this just shows how detail oriented and how well I know he's a friend. That's the most Kim thing to do. To be honest.
I'm a very detail oriented person.
So going into these flights, is it the kind of the same mindset as when you fly nationals and women's worlds? You still, you're focused on, your targets are almost these altitudes, they're not visible to see, but it's almost the same kind of mindset where you've got a common goal. It's basically you're winning your records. Is that kind of the same mindset, or what's that kind of like?
Yeah. I guess it's similar. I feel like, I don't know. I almost feel like there's more pressure at those events, to let down your team and mess up in front of everybody else. I had a really supportive crew for my record flights, and they had been out there with me for one failed attempt already. And, even though, I didn't make it, they were nothing but supportive and said, when are we going to go again? When can we do this again? Even though they had driven 10 hours out to, middle of nowhere to launch a balloon, so that, they're a little different mindsets, and I hate to say it, I'm not as organized in competition. That's more my everyday flying organization. So it's not quite as I'm not taping any tanks, to see when I'm empty kind of thing.
I mean, I've been around you in competition. You were still very organized the one time in Brookfield. I mean, you dealt with this playing with air horns for a better part of 3 days, okay? I mean, we ran a balloon globe for crying out loud. Come on now.
Yeah.
So after all was said and done, what were your official distances?
Yeah, so I'm going to have to look at my paper because I can never memorize them, even though you think this would be something I've memorized. So for the AX2, I ended up going 10,331 feet. And then I flew 61.14 miles. And then the AX5 flight I flew 363.44 miles. So, and then I got, through all of those, I got 3 world records and 3 world records on my AX5, 3 world records on my AX2, and then obviously those 3 world records for each of them were national records as well. And then I got an additional 3 national records on my X2 flight. So all said and done, 6 world and 9 national records.
We always talk about gas ballooning and record flights. I don't think I could do them. Man, what if I go to the bathroom up there? What are you going to do?
Yeah, that is the number one question I get. To each his own. Some people I've heard, do some different things. I wore a diaper. There was no way I was going to do anything else that required me to remove clothing in negative 50-degree temperature. You guys are crazy. But yeah, there's, I did test it beforehand to see how much it could hold because I was not sure that it would work. I am the type of person that I have a very small bladder. I usually have to go very often, especially in the cold. Thankfully, these flights were very busy and I almost totally forgot about it. And I, didn't drink a whole lot of water before it. So, but yeah, I do get that question a lot.
So how long after the flights did you realize that you had all the records?
I knew immediately. So in the flights, I had a checklist of these checklists again. I had a checklist of what records I knew were out there. So I even put records that I thought were above what I could achieve. And, we kind of talk about the AX2 record. I could have gone a lot farther, and there was one record that I could have gotten that was only 10 miles further, but I didn't know that. I didn't write it down. So lesson learned, I should have written down way farther than I thought I could have gotten. And the same thing for the AX5. I could have gone a lot further, but I opted to land after 1 p.m. It was almost 2 o'clock when I landed, and winds were already starting to gust really bad. And about 30, I ended up landing at 8 miles an hour. So not really bad. I kind of found a hole to get into and it was great. But 30 minutes after I landed, it was gusting to 18. So I was very glad I made the decision to land when I did. And I had been given that heads up by Brad T-Meyer that, he said, you have to be down at noon. Afternoon to those winds are going to start picking up very quick. And so even though I knew I could keep flying, I had that voice in the back of my head that said, this isn't, it's going to be too quick. And for me, I did these records, as a way to push myself as a pilot to better my skills. It's not something, I sought out to get accolades. I wanted to do it as safe as possible. I wasn't willing to even break a bone, on these flights, let alone, potentially, fatally injure myself or anything. This was something I just wanted to do to make myself a better pilot. So that safety was always primary in all of the planning and all of the flying to make sure it could be done, in the safest manner possible.
Well, that's just the thing with you, and especially with your husband and his background now, it's like, okay, you're definitely going to achieve things the most safest way possible. Like, I'm sure, on the chance if you would have got out to North Dakota and you would have saw the conditions not be favorable, you would have said, well, unfortunately, we drove all the way out here. I'm sorry, guys, but we got to cancel. And that's part of, I'm sure, the frustration of doing record flights is like there's so much unknown. Like, you know, you go out and it's any flight. You know, go out tomorrow and there might be fog. You know, it's one of those things. And I'm sure it's, you know, when you're crossing a more, you know, we're going across 5 or 6 states, it's even harder to kind of calculate all that. And like you said, you're checking the weather every hour, and it's, I mean, you work a full-time job. You know, it's a taxing job, and you know, you're trying to check weather, and I'm sure it took a lot out of you for those couple months.
Yeah, it was a lot of checking, a lot of you know, planning and constantly worrying. And like you said, I mean, we actually did drive out to North Dakota once and canceled on the launch field after the balloon was inflated. It was just too windy. It wasn't a good day. You know, and we probably did push it, you know, longer than, you know, had it been a normal flight, you know, before pulling the plug. But you know, we knew it wasn't good, and we tried to give every opportunity for the wind to calm down like it was supposed to, and it just wasn't happening. So we canceled. It sucks to drive that far, to get up that early, to, you know, take all that time off of work and it not work out, but it is what it is sometimes. You know, you got to be safe about it.
So do you have any plans for future record flights?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of alluded to my goal for the first, the X2 is 15,000 feet. I ended up getting the female altitude record, but not the overall, because of that cloud layer that built in. So I'd really like to do that someday. And, you know, who knows, maybe some other records down the line. I don't know. I don't have any specific plans, but yeah, I'm sure there'll be some someday.
So other than more record flights, what else is on your ballooning bucket list?
I actually don't have a ballooning bucket list. I know you guys ask everybody this, what they want to do, but I found that just taking things as they come is a lot more rewarding. And I've gotten to do some really cool flights, just being open to whatever comes my way. You know, Adam and I have gotten the opportunity to fly in Taiwan with Gordo, which is really cool. You know, I've competed at 3 Worlds events in Poland and Lithuania, and helped Adam at one in Lithuania as well. And, you know, it's just he's gonna, I don't know, I might be getting his number of world events wrong. I should know this. But, you know, just traveling all over and kind of, you know, if somebody says, hey, I got a cool place to fly, do you want to come join me? You know, why not? Just take it as it comes.
So the last thing we're going to go into today is our fan questions and panelist questions that we ask everybody that comes on the show. So our first one, of course, comes from our buddy Blake Aldridge. What is your favorite Marvel movie?
Well, Blake, my favorite Marvel movie is Captain Marvel, of course. It's the only female one. So, and she's got some pretty awesome powers. So I did watch WandaVision recently, though, and that it's not a movie, though. So I didn't think I can answer that.
I'd consider it close enough. WandaVision was spectacular.
It was really good.
Do you have a go-to pre-flight meal?
For my record flights, yes. I mean, as you can imagine, I was on this crazy diet. I only ate about 1,000 calories a day, which is nothing. It's hard to keep it that low. So, but I wanted to make sure that before these flights, I was not going to be hungry at all on the flight. You know, I took a granola bar with me and some water. But I didn't want hunger to distract me at all. So the night before, I would always fill up on the biggest pasta meal I could find. So wherever we were at, we found whatever restaurant that served really big, usually like lasagna or something, so I could fill up on those carbs and make sure I was full. But for normal flights, no. I mean, I tend not to eat a lot in the mornings before competition. I usually do an apple every morning before competition because it wakes you up, and I'm not a coffee person. So that's my way of waking up, but nothing specific.
So much like professional athletes, if balloonists were to get a song that played when they, you know, were introduced at an event, what would your walk-up song be?
I'm going to thank Jenny Kerber for this one. We talked about this extensively. I'm going to say Woman by Kesha. It's a very good, empowering song.
If you could have lunch with one ballooning legend, past or present, who would it be?
I thought a lot about this question, and I came up with Connie Wolf. She's a pilot who was from my hometown in St. Louis, or at least lived there for a while. And she is in the Hall of Fame, and she's done a lot of amazing flights, both hot air and gas. And she did this all in style. She always had to wear her bird cage on her face and be very done up. And she was not afraid to, kind of put the boys in their place. That she was a really awesome pilot.
What was the first event you ever flew as a pilot?
I flew in Lincoln, Illinois, a smallish event in Illinois. That's kind of a non-event now. But I didn't have enough hours to fly in the event, but they needed another pilot because they did kind of a team style task. And so thankfully, some pilots volunteered to ride in the basket with me while I flew and competed. So I'm really grateful for them that I could experience that. And it was fun to do kind of my first event, with other pilots. I did a lot of my training at events with my dad, and it was kind of cool to do that with other pilots too.
So now we're going to go into our actual fan questions. So our first one, if you could change one thing about either of your record flights, what would it be?
If I could be magic and wave a wand, it would be better weather. I mean, that's kind of a cop-out answer, but really, that's the one disappointing thing. I think you did an excellent job of, planning and calculating a lot of things and performing better than expected. But, sometimes you can't change weather, and, that would have been nice to be able to get ultimate goals.
So this next one comes from a specific person that you might be able to figure out. What was the most badass thing that happened on any of the world record flights?
Supposedly, I talked to somebody beforehand, and they said there's only one answer.
Oh, no. I don't know what the answer is.
I don't either. This is a Brad.
It came from somebody. I won't give out names.
I'm sure it came from my household, but I'm not sure what the answer is. Oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't know if he's talking about like.
Who said it had to be a he?
In my flights, I kind of lived with a striker in my hand, so if that's what he's talking about. There was a lot of flame outs, a lot of, all of a sudden you're dropping 1,000 feet a minute, and then I bet he's talking about, I got permission to, as a balloon, we can't overfly Class B airspace without a transponder. And on one of my flights, we drove out there and we canceled. I was going to launch inside the Kansas City air traffic control control area. And I got permission to overfly the St. Louis Class B airspace in a balloon below all the jets. So that was really cool. I had to coordinate with the ARTCC, which is the Air Route Traffic Control Center out of Kansas City. They control a huge swath of areas. And they gave me permission, because it was a world record flight, that I could overfly, with the caveat that if it was too busy and the controllers couldn't handle it, that I would not be able to do it. So that would have been an awesome flight.
As cool of a story as it is, apparently it's the wrong answer. The correct answer is frostbite.
All right. Well, so I took off for the AX2 flight, and I started going up, and it was very, very cold. And like I said, I was living with the striker in my hand because with the oxygen deprivation at that altitude, the burner kept flaming out. And it's very finicky. Sometimes it would do it if you pulled too quickly. Sometimes it would do it if you released too slowly or pulled too slowly. So I had taken off my big mitt, and I had a small glove on, but it was just, one of those old, fabric gloves, nothing warm. And I had probably been up about 15 minutes, and I'm still climbing to altitude. And all of a sudden I get an awful, awful shooting pain through my arm, just all the way from my elbow to my fingertips. And, you have to make the decision then, do you keep climbing and, risk this frostbite, or do you land? And I opted to keep climbing, knowing that I could, lose some feeling in my arm. I made the decision because I stuck my hand back in my large mitt, put a lot of, heat packs in there. And I told myself if I made it to altitude and it still hurt and my hand hadn't warmed up, then I could come back down. So it's, yeah. But I still, anytime it's cold out, I still get tinglies in that arm in the same spot.
Our next one comes from our good friend, Jenny Kerber. What is it like to have more certifications than Adam?
That's awesome. It's great.
Don't I have more certifications than Adam since I'm a drone pilot too?
No, because he's got, well, I guess his TP would have the same then. He's also a drone pilot. So, yeah.
So our next one, it's the last day of a competition event. You and Adam are tied for the lead. Who's the pieball?
As much as I'd like to say I'd make him go first, the true answer is 100% I would be the pieball, because Adam is so pokey when he gets off the ground. I'd get so frustrated and I would just go. We've flown competitions together, kind of teaming up, and that is always what would happen. There was one event where I took off, flew, it was Indianola, 5 targets, landed, refueled, and he is still flying. And I met him at the last target, and I'm literally standing there with my cell phone, counting down until the target closes. I'm like, you have 30 seconds to get this baggie out of your basket. So yeah, 100%, I would be off the ground first.
So we got one more from you. One more for you, apologies, from our good friend Jenny Kerber as well. What is your biggest advice for other female pilots that want to break records?
Go for it. That it's just, I think doing records is a good way to push yourself as a pilot, and you learn a lot. And, we talked about flight planning a lot. There's a lot more to these records than just a normal flight. And you learn more not only about yourself, but about your equipment and about balloons in general and what they can handle, and, how much just these little things can affect your flight. And so if anybody has questions or wants to get into it, feel free to reach me. I'll help out.
Well, that's all we got for you this time on BurnerCast. Thank you again, Kim, for joining us tonight.
Thanks,
we are announcing that we are going to a bi-weekly schedule now. With flying season coming up, it's a lot harder for us to both schedule episodes, and between all 3 of us hosts being pilots, getting those episodes out there. We all want to go fly. So we are going to be moving to a bi-weekly schedule, but we can announce our next guest, going to be pilot Vic Johnson, joining us on the show. Thank you guys for all tuning in again. Thanks for coming on, Kim. We'll see you next time on BurnerCast.